Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to wait another little bit and make sure everybody gets on here. If you have any questions for the coaches, I see a few attendees already starting to roll in. If you would just make sure to put them in the Q&A, use the Q&A button down below, and you'll be able to get those questions to us and we can take them on and answer anything you have. Ryan, how you doing today? Tell me something good.
I'm doing great, man. Tell you something good. I had a really good workout this morning.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What made it good, Ryan?
Too many push-ups.
Too many?
I'm doing that. Have you seen that 22-day 22 push-up challenge?
Yes, going around.
Yeah. So that combined with push-ups in a workout is a lot to tackle.
Nice. How about you, Mark? Tell me something good.
Can't complain out here on the West Coast. Weather's nice. That's nice. Got outside in the backyard a little bit. You know, we're sheltering in place, but backyard is our place. So got some time outside. It was good.
It's the extent of our leash these days, right?
Yeah, a little vitamin D never hurt anyone, right?
Yep. We got a few more people joining us. I'll give it about another 30 seconds and we'll get rolling.
What's your something good there, Chip? What do you got going on?
You know, my something good. A really cool thing happened last night. My youngest is this close to being an Eagle Scout, and he ran for the senior patrol leader in this scout troop. It's got about 80 kids in it. It's a pretty large group, and he won. So I was really, really, really proud of him. He had to do a speech and the whole thing, and so he'll hold that title for the next 3 months and be leading his troop. So it was a really, really cool thing to see.
That's awesome.
He was ecstatic. So we'll go on and get started here. First, welcome everybody. I will tell you, we are also, in this great age of Zoom, and we now have the ability to simulcast. So we're over live on Facebook as well. So if you're catching us on Facebook, we'll be monitoring the feed there as well. So if you have any questions, put them in the comments down below the video. And for those of you who are on with us today, if you would have any questions for the coaches, please use the Q&A down below in the Zoom window. And everything is fair game. Well, I should say most everything is fair game. But we're here to answer questions and help you as best we can. Today on the call, we have myself. I'm Chip Gallant. I'm a certified entrepreneur coach with Petra. We also have Mark. Mark, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks, Chip. Mark Comiso here. I'm one of the certified coaches at Petra as well, based out on the West Coast in San Francisco.
And Ryan Markell. Ryan, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Chip. Yeah, Ryan Markell, certified entrepreneur coach at Petra, and actually live, I think, probably about 1.5 miles or 2 miles from Chip in Franklin, Tennessee, just south of Nashville.
Yeah, we have, we're based here, but we have folks all over. Actually, we got our office in Europe, in London now, and Mark's on the West Coast, and we have coaches all over the place. We're going to do about a 60-minute Q&A with you here today. And again, whatever you're dealing with in your business, and when we look at our coaching practice around the scaling up methodology, things typically fall into 4 buckets around people, strategy, execution, and cash. And we're willing and able to answer questions around all those things. So please go on and start putting those in. We've had a few that came in before this happened. So I'm going to go on and open up with the first question. And I'll pose this to you guys to answer first, and then I'll follow up. This is from Zach in Atlanta. What is the #1 thing in business that has surprised you the most over the last 6 weeks? Ryan, you want to take that one?
Yeah. The #1 thing in business that has surprised me the most over the last 6 weeks, I would say the most shocking thing I've seen, I'll give you the most shocking thing and then I'll share something that's probably more relevant. The most shocking thing I've seen is people that are just deciding to close up shop, not because they necessarily have to, because they just don't want to go through this crisis or this pandemic. That has shocked me. I never imagined that would happen, that people would say, hey, I'm just, I'm not going to go fight this out. The thing that's most relevant, I think, that surprised me is how quickly companies, and many that I've worked with for a few years now, have accomplished what they have attempted to for a few years. So one company in particular that I work with, they cater to daycares and schools for lunches and snacks. They've wanted to offer products direct delivered to homes. And they've attempted to do that or think through it or build plans around it even before I started working with them a couple of years ago. And literally within 10 calendar days, they had a full-on site built, program launched, accepting orders and delivering them within 24 hours. So the speed at which businesses are innovating and, dare I say, pivoting over the last 6 weeks has been the most shocking thing to me.
Thanks. Mark, what about you?
Yeah, I think the most shocking or interesting thing to me has been kind of that the difference between those that are kind of going through and adapting and making the changes, and the ones that are not. It really is. There's a huge gap. We've seen people who, to Ryan's point, have kind of turned on a dime. And then others who have not. I think for me, relative to the people, that I've been working with and that we've been coaching, I'm actually pleasantly surprised by how many of them have said, you know what, there are these set of activities that we were doing that were somewhat filling time, right? They were still good activities, but they've recognized that they can kind of push those to the side. They weren't really that important, and really focused on the things that were most important to move them forward, not just during a pandemic, but to move them and their organization forward in a better way. I think one of the things that comes out of this is that I think people are understanding that we're not going to go back to quote unquote normal. We're going to create our new normal. And this is a great opportunity, and seeing people see that, even though it is challenging and there's fear, and we have to acknowledge those fears, but not let them rule us. I heard a good saying once, and I've seen it lived out, is that fear is a good teacher but a terrible master. So if we can use it as something keeps our eyes and ears open, that's great, but we can't just live every day in fear. We have to say, you know what, I don't want to step off of that, but I'm going to walk this line over here.
Yeah, I think the thing I've seen is two things. Number one, kind of piggyback on your comment, Ryan, the speed at which people are innovating, evolving, and pivoting, and especially those who didn't think prior to this happening that they could do it as fast as they have. Mm-hmm. So the environmental impact on the rate of change in a business, because we have had to survive. The other thing I think is also really interesting is how close, as I talk to the companies that I coach, the closeness and the bond between the people who have gone through this is going to be one of those lasting things. I think we're going to see at the end of this, all of us have had relatives who maybe, whether it's a parent, grandparent, uncle, any aunt, cousins and stuff, who may have had to go off to war, and they talk about the bond of their war buddies. And it's like, it's a commonality of the crisis and the events that you made it through together. And that's the thing. I think the people in the companies who've gone through this are going to have a bond unlike anything before. And it's going to be interesting to see that the lasting bond that carries on with this. So Mark, did you get a question that came in?
Actually, we had one that did come in, that came into me ahead of time. I'll throw it out there for you guys to ruminate on here a little bit. So one of the ones that came through is an interesting one in this time when we've got Zoom and all of us sheltering in place. But the question came in, this is from Sally. She's from Southern California, San Diego. She said, how do you balance your work lifetime with the home time when you're in that same space? right? So we don't now have those separate places of you go to work and you come to home. So how do you balance that and create the best environment possible? So Chip, you want to tack that one?
Yeah, that's one that's really interesting. And there are those of us who have had experience telecommuting before and those who haven't. And I've been doing it for a long time in various different entities in my own companies and the companies that I've been running over the last 25 years. And the thing I will tell you is you have to figure out how to go home at the end of the day. That means if you have a workspace, you leave it. And honor your home time in the same way as you would if you were commuting home at the end of the day from an office or from some other place. So find out what that time is for you, and it's going to be variable. We're going to have different things. I worked till 9 or 10 o'clock last night and was on the phone till that late. So sometimes it's going to vary, but figure out and honor your home time as a sign of respect back to your family. Ryan?
It's a great point, man. I love the actual like clocking out part. So I think it's going to be very different, Mark, for everybody based off their individual circumstances. A big variable is, do people have kids at home or not? And then if they do, what are the ages of those kids? I know I've got a 2- and a 5-year-old, so dealing with that work-life balance, it quite frankly doesn't exist. There isn't a balance there. It's building in those blocks of, okay, I've got an hour here that I've got to be on a call, and I need you guys to go play for, and setting up those short-term or shorter periods of time. To Chip's point, I find as part of that ritual, aside from just keeping, work or putting that away, even just something as simple as changing clothes, right? So having a different outfit to change into when I'm going to start working, and then changing out of those clothes into something else, even if it's damn near the same attire, just that physical difference is extremely helpful for me. And so I think to Chip's point, building in those practices about what are those rituals, those habits to start and stop working at the beginning or end or whatever the shift would be, are great things to implement right now as we're working from home.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. Both of you do is I think that as we've all gone through this, I think one of the most shocking things, we go back to the first question, is how quickly this all happened. Right? I think that's been a challenge for all of us. And I go to Sally's question. I think having to work from home and figure out how to put all these things together happened very rapidly. And I think one of the things that is important is, and Sally, I'll answer it directly to you here, is that, I think it's also important just to be human. When we're on these calls and I've got a young daughter at home as well, like Ryan does. And, I let people know that, hey, you know what, we're figuring this out together. But you may see my daughter scream across the background. And I think everybody's a little bit understanding and forgiving right now. We're all in a place where we know this is not what we had been doing before, and we're learning to readjust. So I think part of it is I think part of, getting the balance, as Sally was asking, right, is about saying there is no known now, so let's work on it together. And hopefully you can forgive me a little bit if Lucy goes screaming across, and just so everybody knows, you may see Lucy go by.
Yeah. Ryan, what
Very
you got?
good. Hey, just a quick comment or shout out we got from Facebook, Chip, just as a heads up, from John David Smith. He said that our daily huddles for the past year plus helped us tremendously when we started working from home. We've actually hired close to 30 new employees in the past month, so they're thriving in this environment. And I'm curious to his comment, what best practices are you guys seeing really come to life in daily huddles right now, as people are working from home or at least more dispersed and remote than previously?
What
about you?
I'll tackle that one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was going to jump in on that one, Ryan, and say it's been interesting that, most of the companies that I've been working with have said straight up that had they not had these rhythms of communication in place when this occurred, that the ability to adapt would have been monumentally more difficult. And so, John and John David Smith there, who read in, congratulations on hiring more people during a challenging time. But it is about communication. I mean, you know, you go back to anything in life, not just business, but life in general is, you know, communication is the key. It's just like location in real estate is the big thing in life. It's about communication, and these, you know, daily huddles or weekly, you know, sessions that you do, however you're doing them, whatever your rhythms are, really are the ways that we are able to stay connected and be connected. And now when we have to do the social distancing, it's that much more important so that people feel like they, you know, are connected and know how they can participate, and that they know others are there.
I think the other thing to piggyback on that, Mark, is using huddles in ways that can simulate life that you had prior to this, and especially life around the office. Are there other huddles, other meetings you can do in terms of just social, you know, social gatherings? It's one thing that, you know, like we talk about and teach in our methodology around the morning huddle and the weekly huddle and the different meeting rhythms, we call them. But do more. You know, I've seen people have just an open Zoom where you can come in and work together. No one has to say anything. It's kind of like if you work in a communal space at your office, there's just chatter and stuff that happens. On to happy hours, on to things like bringing in entertainment. You know, we for up until just recently, we were doing 2 huddles a day, a standard morning huddle and an afternoon kind of recap huddle for our team to come in and kind of download and decompress from all this stuff that has been going on, because it's all been at a fast pace. Right?
That's well said. Yeah. You know, the same thing, Mark, that you mentioned, I've heard a dozen times, where those that say, gosh, I don't know how we would handle this if it weren't for our meeting rhythms and specifically daily huddle. Chip, to your point, I've also seen it might not necessarily be daily at this point, but at least every other day, maybe a Monday, Wednesday, Friday huddle for a COVID-19 force. And I'm hearing, you know, a specific member that we work with say, it's great to know this is something needs to be addressed. I can just drop it in and know that tomorrow morning at 8:30, I'll have my team of 6 people jumping on a huddle, and we can tear this apart. So I can not worry about it for the rest of today, because it's important, definitely important. It's not urgent. And the fact of not needing to, okay, when am I going to get these 5 other people on a call? How do I get their calendar? It's just blocked off to do that, has been effective for them in tackling those important things that come up throughout the week.
Yeah. Here's a question that came in just a second ago from Anonymous, looks like. As we start to re-up to our new normals, what new challenges do you expect companies to face? Brian, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of talk of unknown or not really sure what's going to happen next. I think you know, and Chip, you mentioned that concept of war buddies, that we've gone through things together. We're all seeing the same changes happen pretty consistently, where it's a certain area, you know, a whole entire state or at least a big county will go to work from home. I think one of the challenges we're going to see is various industries being in different phases of the rebound, if you will, and the complexities of that, where we'll talk to friends, family members, neighbors, or we'll talk to employees and coworkers who their spouses are in a completely different phase from a work standpoint than we are. So I think it's more important to really listen first and understand the other side's perspective of what they're going through as we come out of this and rebound, because just purely based off of regulations by industry, almost everyone's going to be at a different phase, let alone within those industries based off of how you handled how things were going before you got here and how you handled the process of going through it.
Mark?
Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting is that, you know, people talk about, you know, new normals, right? And, you know, what challenges are going to be. I think, you know, for me, what I'm seeing is that, you know, what is normal, right? What's the definition of normal? You put normal in quotes. You know, I think the challenges that we're going to see are things that we never anticipated. I think we're going to see, you know, we had to jump into this. I've been talking with some of my members about, you know, over the first couple of weeks as we've all gone through this around the globe, I call it kind of that adrenaline phase, right? Where everybody just jumps in, you do what you have to do. But after that adrenaline phase, you also hit kind of an adrenaline drop. And we've hit some of that. I think what's going to happen in the future is I think we're going to have some more of that. I think we're going to, it's not going to be we didn't drop and that's going to go steady and up to the right of coming back. I think we're going to have, some bumps along the road. So I think some of the challenges are we're going to feel like we got a handle on what this thing might be in its current state. And we think that's going to stay. And, and it'll be a steady state for a while because that's what's happened in the past, right? We got to a place where it got to a steady state and we could kind of predict things. I think it's going to be very unpredictable for a period of time. And human beings don't do a great job with unpredictability. So I think some of the challenge is how do we get good or better, I should say, at doing that. And, I'll use an analogy and you guys will appreciate it because we all hang out some in the past, but, I used to be a snow ski instructor. And what I tell people now in business is it's got to be like you're up on the ski slopes and keep those knees flexible, right? How do we, absorb some of these challenges as we go through and the new quote unquote normal will be a little bit more flexible. Right. And we have to understand that we might have some bigger highs and some lower lows, but we can work together to get through them. So don't know what they'll specifically be, but know they'll be there.
Yeah. To add on to both of your comments, I think to me, the biggest challenge is going to be how we're going to balance productivity. And in several different facets of that conceptually, if you think about those who are comfortable dealing with the virus as a social concern and those who are not. And what is that going to do in terms of the total productivity of an organization based on those who may not want to return back to an office for some time? So how are we going to balance that in terms of just focusing on the overall output of a company, whatever its deliverable is in goods or services, and its ability to generate revenue? So there's that. I think the other thing in terms of productivity we're going to see is a second piece of that is around the supply chain. We do not yet know what is going to happen to not only our regional, national, but also the global supply chain as this unfolds. I think we're just beginning to see what that's going to look like. And if you just take into account what's happening just in the personal protective equipment realm, and the fact that as just a general non-healthcare worker, go try and find a mask right now. And there are hundreds of thousands of manufacturers making masks overseas and domestically. You can't find them. It's not unlike what's going on with toilet paper. It's all that supply chain stuff, and how is not only us inside of business reacting to those things in terms of our ability and our capacity to deliver, but also what's happening on the consumer side. Are those consuming those goods and services?
And I think, Chip, just to kind of to piggyback on that is, I think it's it's not only not only we're kind of just hitting the tip of the iceberg, it's both a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity for people to understand a new way to think, a new way for supply chains to be more effective and efficient, to understand what they were. I think a lot of us didn't understand, the way the systems worked because they just worked. Now they're not going to work because those products or services won't be available. And there's opportunity now for many people in the business world to say, hey, let's take a look at that. Whereas before we didn't need to. Now we're going to need to.
I think
Mark, when you say that,
go ahead, Ryan.
Well, when you say that, you talk about all these little things that we sort of take for granted. Even something as simple as how do we greet each other and how do we say bye, right? So it's very common to greet someone with a hug or a handshake, and it's going to be really awkward for the first few weeks, if not months or longer, and I've experienced that, to go up and say hi to someone 6 feet apart, not get close to them. It's those little things we take for granted, be it supply chain, whatever it may be, that we're going to start to have to question. There's a lot of energy that goes into that, because right now we don't even think about them. It's just things we do naturally.
Mm-hmm. And I really do think out of all of this, we are going to be seeing a resurgence of domestic manufacturing and localized supply chain stuff. Much like you've already seen with the farm to table movement, this is going to further enhance that to more goods and services because of what we're learning as an outcome of this.
That's good. So we have a question that came in just now, actually. What are some things companies should do to boost morale once we come back? Specifically, my company has employees that are not coming back, and we are not looking to hire. We are asking our existing employees to step up and help beyond their role. Mark, you want to jump in there?
Sure. I think that, this is going to depend a lot, and, this is going to be industry related. I mean, I can think of certain industries that will have a tougher time with this than others. I think, Chip, you mentioned it earlier, this is going to be something where we're going to look back on this years from now and say, this is what happened during that time. I think one of the things in boosting morale, I go back to what I mentioned before. This is something I think is important in leadership in business is, for you to be human and real and vulnerable. And I think one way to boost morale is to communicate that, hey, these are challenging times. And as a business leader, you don't have to be the owner or the CEO. You can be, someone who's just in a leadership position, but to, be real about it, not to pretend that, hey, it's all going to be great. And, let's just pitch in together and we'll get through it. And it's going to be fine. We have to have some of that. I think positivity is a great thing, but to also, boosting morale is being real. People know if you're attempting to pull the wool over their eyes and saying, hey, you know what, times are tough right now. We don't know where revenues are going to be going. We don't know exactly how we're going to get there. But as a team, we can get to a place that we need to get to. So here's the things we need. And we only have the resources that are here. We'd love to have some more. We've had them in the past. I think that honesty and that vulnerability is a great way to boost morale with team members. And, and even to say, yeah, you know what, I'm sad that we don't have, so-and-so here or this role here in the organization that we used to. We look forward to getting back there. We're going to get back there by, working together and banding together.
On the morale front, I think whenever we get back, just think about your own thing you're dealing with and with being remote, and you may not be in an office right now. And that's kind of like the first stage of coming back. I've got companies that I'm coaching now that are planning to come back, and they've picked a day, and it's like, we've got to get everybody re-onboarded. And I think the thing as it relates to morale is, number one, you're going to have to, people coming back in are going to have been through a very tough emotional thing. And I think it needs to be top of mind. I think that companies need to be doing more and thinking of your company as a micro community, not just a facility to go and work and gain revenue and get paid for those things, but it's a micro community. So not only through the staff, but their families too. We've all been through this. We've all, for those of us who've been working home, my family is just as involved in my work as I am. And doing things together to bring that bond and really cement the culture. And I talked about this a minute ago with the War Buddies. We're going to have incredible bonds. And I think the best thing we can do for morale is to further and propel that and double down on that culture and that sense of community that has developed as we have seen ourselves go through this, and be more mindful of it. Eat together, commune together, laugh together, cry together, and just really double down on the culture. And I think that's going to be your biggest morale boost.
Great points, guys. I'm actually going to piggyback on both. We talked earlier about the uncertainty of just everything right now. And, Mark, you talk about sharing directly. I think that's key. We've got to be direct. And the Gallup organization, the Gallup polling organization, has shown for years in their employee engagement surveys that the number one most important question to employee engagement is, do I know what is expected of me at work? So, in this question, it comes about like they're taking on additional responsibilities. Do I know what the landscape is? I think it's critical, Mark, to your point, that we're very direct about here's what's expected both of your role and just of the circumstances right now. And then Chip, as you talk about, culture and just investing in the community, you and I were on a fireside chat last night. There was a phenomenal tactic that was shared, which is going and doing a 15-minute dream walk with your team, right? To take a 15-minute stroll with them and just understand, like, what are your dreams? Get them to think out a little bit further into the future, not focused on just the day-to-day, ideally walking them outside around the office 6 feet apart, not shoulder to shoulder or hand in hand right now, just maintain that distance, and getting an understanding of where are they wanting to go in their life. And that's a 15-minute activity that's going to pay dividends with building that connection with those teammates of yours as they come back to work as a result of things loosening up a bit.
I think I also want to add into it. I agree and Chip on your point of, on those foundational elements. I think one of the things that boosts morale is for people to, one of the things that, everybody's looking for right now is how do I get my feet back under me, right? How do I feel like I got a little bit of solid ground? And I will tell you all out there, in the business world, the thing that is your, guiding post is, what are those core values of our organization? What do we stand for? As I like to say with the companies that I work with is every organization has core values. It's just a matter of whether you know them and are taking advantage of them and using them to your advantage. I think a way to boost morale is to fall back to those and say, we're living the core values, and the team, really will appreciate that of knowing, okay, I know that point is solid. I can put my foot down and in a good way, right? Of, hey, I can step on that and build from there. And, people, the team members are looking for a little solid footing.
Well said. Another question came in and asked, if you've adjusted your services to fit this unusual or remote time, how do you know if or when to bring back previous ways of doing things? Chip, do you have some thoughts on that?
Boy, that's a good question. I think the first thing you want to think about is what's the appropriate way to stage the return to, I'll use quote fingers, normal, either whatever the new normal is. So I don't think you do it all at one. You don't return all at once. Be strategic about it. I know as I've been coaching a couple of companies through like the re-ramp up to return to business, there has been a series, and we're looking at it almost in waves. You may want to bring people back in waves. You may want to reinstitute those processes or techniques in your business in waves when it makes sense. And also you can use the way the ebbs and flow of your business, whether, one easy thing to do is think about revenue. What can we do in conjunction with different revenue levels that's going to trigger those things being re-onboarded, because it makes sense to do it in line with those things that equate with revenue that come from capacity and throughput and all the different components of how you deliver your service. Mark?
Yeah, I think that, one of the opportunities I think we all have as business owners and leaders is we now have an opportunity to slowly add these things back in and see if they really do make sense. Maybe this is a bad analogy. Anybody who's gone through this, I have in the past myself, so hopefully you all hang with me. But if you ever had a food allergy or an allergy and you went to the doctor, and how they attempt to figure out which one it is to, on food allergies, you take everything out and then you slowly add one thing back in. And if you have a reaction to it, you found one of your allergies. I kind of see that, analogy in business, which is, I think we've been doing a lot of things and things were rolling along well and doing pretty good. And I think that as we come back, I don't think we should assume that we know the things that we were doing are the right things. Maybe the things in the past were the things that were keeping us from being able to do other things, other great things. So adding them back in, one at a time or slowly, a little bit, Chip, you were referencing that, so that we can see what is the impact, and is that having a positive? Is it pushing us towards the goals that we've set for ourselves, or the things that we stand for? What is our core purpose and our big, hairy, audacious goal? What are those things? And is this moving us closer, or is it just keeping us busy? And I think we've gotten an opportunity, albeit a challenging one, but an opportunity to look and say, is this something that will serve us and serve our purpose, or was it just keeping us busy? Should we add it or not?
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Another way to look at this might be to outsource the decision to your clients. I think it's a great opportunity right now to make these decisions, from feedback direct from an organization's client base. As we've seen companies pivot, to moving from this service to that, or from churning down this service because it's not relevant, reach out to those people either that we're currently serving and or that we used to serve, and ask them what they think, right? Because ultimately, I share this a lot, in companies, we're really good at making decisions as though we're the customer of what we would want. And I often will ask people, so how many of you are paying money to this business? And they look at me funny, like, we're employees. What are you talking about? Well, that means by definition, you're not a customer of this business. So yeah, we have an idea of what people want. Let's go ask those that are literally voting with their wallet what they're wanting us to do, and not necessarily exclusively make decisions based off that. So I would give it a lot of weight as a data point. And I think right now is a great opportunity to have that client council of those top, handful of clients that you can talk to on a monthly or quarterly basis to help in making these very significant decisions.
I had an old mentor who asked you a great question. It goes along with that, Ryan. He said, Mark, would you get your checkbook out and write a check for that? Right? And he's like, I never thought about it like that. It's like, I work here. Why would I do that? I'd just go around the corner and get it. Like, yeah, that's the point. You need to be thinking about, there are people that are writing checks for this, and does it make sense? I like that, Ryan. That's good.
Yeah.
Here's a good, I got a question from Jim Barnhouse in Dallas, Texas. What's the one strategic thing that has been overlooked in the past that will not be overlooked going forward?
Oh, preparation. That's easy. Disaster recovery planning. Now, you said not overlooked going forward. I think unless things change significantly, call it 3 to 6 or 7 years from now, it'll probably start to be overlooked again. But for the next 24 to 36 months, you're going to have a far more, if you're an insurance broker, I mean, almost every, if not every company that I work with has increased insurance in some capacity, whether it's general liability, whether it's some type of loss on a building, what have you. So those are going to be industries where there's going to be a lot more fruitful conversations. If you're talking about disaster recovery planning from an IT standpoint, so I think all of that preparedness for planning of what could go bad, I think will change a lot going forward.
Mm-hmm. Mark?
Yeah, I think that we had gotten complacent in a lot of areas within strategy. We all thought, oh, we're doing this great. It's going, because we kept going up and to the right. Things have been going well. Not for everybody, I get it, but for a vast majority. And I think that we're going to, come back to the basics and understand that strategy is, there's many components to it. Strategy means different things to different people, but, really coming back and saying, what are the things that matter to us and what matters to one company might not matter to another, but, what are those fundamentals that we can say, hey, this is how we're going to look at moving forward and look out a little bit more thoughtfully. To Ryan's point is I think we've gotten out of the habit of saying, what ifs. There's been a little bit of, I don't have to do a lot of what if planning because I kind of know what's coming. Well, nobody saw, end of February, early March coming. And I think it will cause people to, from a strategic viewpoint, say, hey, maybe I should spend some more time. And one thing I like to say to business leaders and especially early stage business leaders, is that, if you're not working on your business more than 80% of the time, then I don't care what your business card says, you're not a CEO, right? A CEO works on the business and they think about these things continuously, right? What is it, the what if scenarioing? And I think that we got out of that a lot, and I think we'll get back to that over the next, I agree, Ryan, 24, 36 months, we'll get back to spending a lot more time thinking about, what if?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind for me is very specifically is the T in the SWOT analysis. And how many of us, and we've coaches have been talking about this amongst ourselves and with our colleagues. How many of us, when we go do a SWOT on a business, actually really, really pay attention to what the T is? What are those threats? And I know from the companies I coach, and prior to this, we had just done a whole slew of annual resets for our members, and I would bet to say there wasn't a pandemic on any of the threats that we all worked on, over the last 4 or 5 months prior to this. And I think now, knowing what this does, to me, it's paying more attention to, if you abide by the kind of the strategic elements of SWOT, or there's other versions when we call SWET, strengths, weaknesses, trends. Those things, the threats and the trends are going to, I think people are going to be taking way more seriously after this, and then doing the work to really, really mitigate those things.
And I think, Chip, you bring up a good point, which is, and I know I've seen it too, we've talked some at Petra Coach on this in our coaching sessions together, is that I think that the SWET or the SWOT, I think there's really 2 T's, right? And one is, what are the threats, right? What are those things that we need to look at, how we do things to mitigate threats? And you're right, I don't think anybody put a pandemic on there. I certainly know, I don't know about you guys, but before the middle of February, I think I might have used the word pandemic, less than 5 times in my life. And I've used it a lot more than that since. So I don't know that I would have ever put it as a threat. We need to look at that, and I think that will come back. But I do think those trends are the other T is something that we'll get into more. So, towards this question, what are we going to be seeing? I find that the trends are what's going on around us that might not be exactly in our industry, but is related or similar, or we can take learnings from. So I think it is going to be kind of a little bit of this, adding it's going to be the SWOTT. What are the threats and what are the trends? And getting people to look at those things and give time and space to understand how that's impacting their business.
Yeah, and one quick little thing is, if you're out there and you're dealing with this as it relates to what's going on in the business with your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats or trends, as well as you're still dealing with some of this crisis stuff, there are tools that we have, and we've got a lot of workshops that we're doing typically every Tuesday and Thursday of the week. And you can go on petracoach.com/COVID-19 and see a list of everything that we have coming up, including the webinars we're doing. And so we have specific workshops on how do you, if you've been funded through the SBA or the PPP program, what do you need to now do to be thinking about spending that money correctly and accounting for it, for your eventual reporting back of what has come out of the use of those funds. And then B, if you're looking, we have a pivot planning workshop. If you're needing to do and think around some things with your organization and think through the process of pivoting or getting prepared to come back to restart, the workshop there will help you certainly. And it's a couple hours of your time. And all of our feedback has been really, really great so far. So check that out on petracoach.com. Let's see, Mark, you got a question?
I was say it's interesting you mentioned pivot, because we did have a question came in, Chip, on there that says, you heard you guys talking about pivot. We hear a lot of that. the person asked here, do you have any examples of interesting or great pivots? So Ryan, you want to take a shot at that one?
Yeah, I'll share two. The first is, I mentioned earlier, a daycare, a catering company for daycares and schools that in the greater Toronto area, and schools have been shut down for 4 weeks now. So they literally don't have places to provide food to. And they have pivoted to providing frozen packaged goods, right? It's more or less a meal, but typically the portions of 4 to 6. And they will deliver those to the homes of people that anybody, but primarily their customers are those that they previously served children in daycares. And while they're making the same product, that is a humongous pivot from a logistics and a supply chain standpoint. For starters, you go from delivering food in like hotel pans that is at a certain temperature. In many cases, it's almost too hot, so that after it waits 30 minutes, it cools down to that right temperature, and then they use some type of a heating element to maintain it. Going from that to now we're delivering to somebody's doorstep where it's frozen in a cooler. Like, that's a completely different animal. So that's the first. The second is a much larger pivot, which I think is a great example of how we can think differently about our businesses. So a company that provides and maintains interior plants for hospitality, for office buildings, for retail spaces, malls, what have you, right? While they've maintained a good portion of their clients, in some instances, they can't get into the businesses, right? Because they're shut down and they have to meet somebody there. What they're doing is they're pivoting to providing, well, let me frame this up better. They sat there and went, we have this team of 65 technicians in the field that can go and do maintenance, but they don't necessarily have this work to go do. What could we do with this asset that we have? And they determined they could go provide office disinfectant solutions, where they use the same commercial grade sprayers to use pesticides and things like that for plants. And they can use those to distribute disinfectant solutions throughout offices to kill viruses, much like COVID-19. 3 months ago, yeah, there'd be some people that are interested in that, maybe something like medical spaces or hospitals. Nowadays, especially we talked earlier about people coming back to work, every office is a candidate for them. So not only are they able to provide additional services, it also becomes a lead generation, because now they build relationships. They have one of their technicians go in and provide this new service, and then they can mention, oh, by the way, we also offer the support and maintenance of your office plants as well.
Yeah.
Right.
The one that comes to mind for me is I'm going to brag on our team a little bit, not so much because my contributions were small, but the stuff that we did very, very early on, and subsequently what we've been able to carry to the companies we coach and a lot of companies we don't. The pivot that Andy Bailey did, and the thinking that he and the leadership put forth in how we pivoted, where we went from, our methodology has always been built around scaling up companies to more, and literally over the course of a weekend, we pivoted our business into a company built to help through crisis management, and the tools and everything that they did. And this is not me kissing up to our leadership, but definitely genuine, because I won't speak for you guys, but I'll know when I look back on this, 15, 20 years back, what we've been able to do as a team collectively and with the companies we work with is going to be some of the proudest work of my career. And it really goes back to what Andy and the leadership has done, preparing us to help as many people as we have had through this.
Yeah, I think, Chip, you bring a good point up, which is, we're all going to look back on this and go, I remember when, right? And this is what I did. So I see this as a huge inflection point for all of us in our growth as human beings and as business people. We're going to look back and say, these are the things we did, or say these are things we didn't do. So which side of the fence do we all want to be on? For me, there's been a lot of different pivots that have occurred that we've all seen. The one that comes to mind for me is one that actually is a lack of a pivot. So you talk about this, and what I mean by this is a good friend, and this isn't a company I was working with, but I saw it out there, who had a sewing school. So imagine, a whole bunch of sewing machines, and people come in and do sewing classes, and that went to nothing overnight. And the gal who was running this, right, she had an opportunity to maybe take those and do something different with the materials and everything else. And she didn't do that. And I actually saw on Facebook somebody else is doing that now. So it was, we talked about it, and she's like, I don't know how to package these things, Ryan. To your point, is I don't know how to go from doing this one thing to another thing. And, that's going to be a challenge. I don't know if they'll make it. Another big one that, is to look at, I think of one where they looked at the raw materials that they had in their business and then figured out how to make that work. And this was a brewery, right? And this brewery was like, had a facility that people used to come into and drink beer at and all that. And they took this and they said, well, what's one key component that comes out of a brewery? It's alcohol. And what's, something you need to kill this virus is alcohol. They're like, well, we know how to produce that. So they went from producing beer to producing hand sanitizer made out of alcohol. Great pivot. What was a raw material that they had that they could use, and they built something to do that. So, just some examples of things that are around.
Cool. You guys had any more questions come in?
Yeah, I just had Jim actually sent just at the beginning of this to me, just a tactical one. And I know, Mark, you've spent a lot of time on this. What are the best practices to position your company for PPP forgiveness? Is there one or two that we can just quickly share with the group?
Yeah, Chip, you mentioned we've got a lot of stuff going on the Petra website, and if you go on there, you can see and go into COVID-19. As a matter of fact, there is a webinar going on, or a workshop going on literally right now on all of this government, the subsidies and the PPP program and all of that. I think as far as the forgiveness on the payroll protection program, the PPP, it really is about saying, the thing I like to say is I spent a lot of time with this along with a couple of the other Petra coaches. And the thing I'm pointing out to our members and others is that, go with what the intent was of the PPP, which is it was meant as a payroll protection program. How do we protect the people that are in our companies and covering the payroll for them? And as long as that's what you're doing, all right, they're of the money that people get in the payroll protection program, the way it's been set up is 75% of that money needs to be used for payroll, paying people to, keep their jobs. And 25% is in there to cover things like your rent or your mortgages, the things, supporting things that you would need. And being given forgiveness is about saying, hey, this is what I used it for, making sure you're using it for those purposes. One thing that we've been telling people is to make sure that, or not make sure, but to go and set up a separate bank account, a new bank account that you put this PPP money in, and you can show, what, I took the money from here in this separate account and I paid it to the payroll service. That's a very direct way to say that, so that, when there is the audit at the end, you're like, look, I used it to pay here and I used it to pay my landlord. Great. There's no commingling of funds. There's a lot of unknowns, and there are going to be that. And I think the cleaner you can be in keeping really good records, and setting that up for success, the better off you'll be. That's a quick one.
Yeah, I think the other one on there, and I completely agree. Keep everything segregated so that there is a very clear path of the transactional information, so you can just, there is no question. I think the other thing too is set up separate G&L codes in your accounting system to track expenses. Now, this is not necessarily about the forgiveness stuff, but it very well could impact what's coming in the future in terms of either tax credits or things related to filing taxes, where you have captured those expenses around COVID-19 and the expenses, excuse me, you have incurred in terms of, cleaning, disinfecting, training, PPE equipment for your staff, all those things that tells a story of what you had to do in terms of things that were not normal operations for your company that may then become something of a deduction or a tax credit in the future. Be prepared so you don't have to go recreate that story later on.
Yeah, it's a good point. And speaking of not having to recreate that story, I think it's a great perspective to have of, like, you would take minutes, notes throughout a board meeting or something of that nature, create that same story, if you will, for what you're doing with the money. So on March 31st, on April 31st, it was deposited. On this date, this amount was spent for payroll. And to Mark's point, having that bank account that follows it, if we document those things as we go, it's going to make it a lot easier to fill out the applications or the documentation to apply for forgiveness. If we have to look back retroactively and attempt to remember what we did, it's going to be far more difficult.
I think too, that kind of to your point there, Ryan, on this is that, is for everybody to understand that, with PPP program, you're talking, there are millions of companies that are getting these, the ones that keep good records, that have an auditable trail, if you will, of information that's easy to do in the moment, right? It takes a little bit of effort, but Chip, to your point, going backwards, if 6 or 8 months from now, somebody comes back around and says, hey, how do you, what did you do with this? In the moment, it only takes me a moment or two to write down, hey, on April 1st, I got this. And on April 15th, I wrote a check to the payroll company. And 8 months from now, it's very easy to look at that and say, here's this. Again, I think that as we look at that and be, understanding, those that keep good records are going to be able to say, here's what I did, and they'll move on. Those that are, looking at the back of a napkin or trying to recall are going to probably get pushed harder. So, I would tell you that keeping better records now takes a lot less effort than attempting to remember later on.
Well, and as we saw this morning, the chairman of the Fed came out and we got an article passed around amongst us that if you received more than $2 million from either the SBA or the PPP program, there is a very good chance that there will be some form of an audit, just to ensure that the intent of the program was honored. So,
it's about the spirit. It's about the spirit of
exactly.
of the act, right? Which is, it's meant to be supporting our employees and keeping people employed and benefits in place, and doing that so that as we all work through this, it helps do that. Those that are using the money for other reasons, those are the people who need to be worried. If you're using it for its intended purpose, then just keep some good records. That helps so that you don't kind of forget something. But that's what it's there for.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, you got a parting thought before we shut down?
It's a good question, man. Thank you. Yeah, I think the thought would be is just taking that extra minute to really engage with your team and understand where they're at. If we notice by the questions, there's a theme around, there's all these uncertainty, things we never dealt with. And as leaders, I think we struggle with those to the point that we may not take the time to ask others because we're stuck in our own head, and realizing that other people need us to come to them and say, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? Let's take a 15-minute walk and just talk about life outside of work. The opportunity to do that now, I think, is more necessary than ever before.
Thanks. Mark?
Yeah, I think, I think, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of challenges around all of us, but there's a lot of humanity around all of us too. I can't remember exactly where I heard this, but I really liked it. I've used it a lot, which is, we talk now about social distancing. It's a good catchphrase, and it's important that we keep a distance, but it's not a social distance, it's a physical distance. We need to keep that physical distance to be safe. but I really believe that we need to up our social connection. How do we stay connected? And, you know, I know Zoom's, you know, become all of our friend, but it's picking up the phone. It's, you know, FaceTime works too, whatever it may be, to stay connected with humanity. And there's a lot of it out there. We're seeing it all over the place, but just, you know, keep your eyes open for it. You know, yeah, it's challenging times, but there's a lot of good things happening too, you know, and to see that and celebrate those as well.
Yeah, and I would say mine piggybacks or dovetails right into that as well, is find those things to be grateful for. If you're feeling down, if you're feeling as though this is too much, go do something for someone else. Go give and find ways to be grateful for what you have, because it will absolutely change your whole frame of mind and your trajectory with everything that's happening. There are so many great things that are going to come out of this. Things that are going to change us on a personal level, and things that are going to change us from a business perspective as well. So all that gets rooted in your ability to be grateful for what you have and what you're going to continue to have as we get through this all. So thanks everybody for coming and hanging out with us for an hour today. Again, I wanted to reiterate, if you go to petracoach.com/COVID-19, you will see all of the workshops that we have coming up, as well as all the webinars and other stuff. We're going to recap this for you, and it'll be out on social media as well as on our website. If you want to take this and share it over with anybody who was not able to see this, as well as all the other things that we're doing. We are invested in you getting back to your normal, whether we coach you or not, because it's just who we are. We're here to help, and if we can help, please let us know. Again, you can reach out to us on the website on petracoach.com, and even on that COVID-19 page on our site, there's a place. If you want a 30-minute free coaching call, you can request that on there, and we'll happily get a coach to you to answer something for you that maybe you wanted to get addressed privately. So thanks again, everyone. Look out for those webinars, look out for those workshops, and we will see you next time. Thanks.